Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the London School of Paediatrics session on the START assessment. We have a couple of lovely TPDs and some lovely recent START participants to talk to you today. I'm recording, and so I'll go on the website and I'll stick a couple of useful links in the chat as we go along. I've got some of your questions from your booking, which we'll go through as a sort of Q&A after everyone's talked, but also if you have any questions as you go along or at the end, stick them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll hopefully put your mind at ease. So let me stop sharing. And I will introduce, first of all, the lovely Opute, who will talk to you about what START is.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I think a lot of you I know. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. I've just got a few slides. Hopefully this will work. I just need to find, where is it? Where is my presentation? Let me see. Now I need to make sure this is sharing. Let me know if you can't see it.
Your screen.
Can you see my screen?
Not the presentation. We can see the how do you want to join your Teams meeting?
Oh no, that's not what I want you to see. Okay, that's not what I want, and I'm not sure how to do this. I'm not very don't share this window, not that window. Okay, so let's see. Well, let's stop sharing that one. Okay, let's see. How do I make this work? Share this window. It says, and I've done that. Can you see it now? Perfect. Okay, so let's start the slideshow. Okay. Hopefully that's working.
Not yet. Oh, yes.
Is it? No?
Perfect. Yep, grand.
Okay. Okay. So Sue is going to talk to you a little bit more about what START, what the assessment is actually like. But basically, it's come out of a need to kind of assure stakeholders, the college, the GMC, and of course our patients, parents, carers that are trainees are ready to become consultants. And because it's such a long time from when formal assessments have been done, and a long time from when you've had interview practice and et cetera, et cetera. So this came out of discussions about what can be done to do it in a formative manner rather than a summative manner. So it's an assessment, it's not an exam. It's not a pass or fail. It's not an exit exam like our surgical colleagues have. It really is just trying to see whether a trainee is, or where the gaps are when it comes to being a consultant. And so that's what this assessment is. So it stands for Specialty Training Assessment of Readiness for Tenure. It's a bit of a mouthful, but tenure being a consultant, so that's an American term. So that's what it is, and actually, when should you do it, really, considering that this is actually looking at preparedness to become a consultant? Well, if you think about it as a formative assessment, not a summative assessment, so not a pass or fail, not, I need to prepare so that I can really hard, so I can get some real good marks and some real good comments. It's really about what are my gaps? Where are gaps that I have to try and close before I get to becoming a consultant? Because we never really stop training, do we? In fact, I think most of my training has been done post CCT than prior to CCT. So it's not about trying to make sure you're the finished article. It's trying to make sure that you are able to hold your own as a consultant. And if there are gaps, that you can actually work towards closing them. And actually, it's also the other thing is actually it helps you identify what your strong points are. And so you can say, I'm an excellent communicator. My MSF showed that, and my START assessment showed that. So when you reflect on your START assessment, you can actually pick up where, potentially where your strengths are. And you can use that when it comes to developing your CV and interview practice. So it's not a pass or fail. And I want people to disabuse themselves of that and take that anxiety away. So obviously it's best done closer, halfway, I think, through ST7, but at any point, level 3 training. So anytime from ST6 to, well, you say ST8. But recently, we've had a few trainees who have not been able to take the assessment within kind of until 6 months to CC2, which is a little bit of a worry, because if you appreciate what I just said about how it helps you decide or plug any and decide what your learning or developmental points are and help, plug those gaps or work towards plugging those gaps, then you've left it rather late. And that could be a disadvantage for you when you become a consultant. And let's face it, it's a great thing when you get your CCT and you get your first consultant job. There's a lot of anxiety around, and it would be great if you knew that you were working towards closing some of those potentially gaps that you may not be aware were there, because they're not necessarily assessed on the training floor in the normal workplace. So it's best for you to do it in the latter half of SD7. Now, the caveats with that will be trainees who want to accelerate their training and fast track, trainees who are subspecialty trainees, and perhaps the START assessment for your subspecialty doesn't happen frequently, so you may have very little choice about when you do it. We are lobbying the college to take away the clinical questions, because really those clinical questions should be assessed on the clinical floor, and this is really more about generic higher level skills, communication, safeguarding, prescription that is relevant to any pediatrician, whether you're an allergy pediatrician, a neonatal pediatrician, or a community based pediatrician. So we really should focus on the generic skills, I think. So I do think you need to have at least 6 months training time left, whole time equivalent, after START, so that you can work in any areas that have been flagged up for you to work on, and just gives you that little bit of breathing space. I know that it used to happen twice a year, but I know that it's kind of, we started to have some ad hoc days, and we've had a few issues recently. So you want to obviously check on the website, and there's a lot of information on the website, on the college website, that is. I think it remains virtual, but Sue will say that. The requirements are laid out very clearly on the college website with the benchmarking standards and anchor statements, etc., etc. So it's an assessment. It's a formative assessment, developmental formative assessment. So you get assessors that will give you feedback about each station. And what's really great is that the college actually helps you in developing a PDP. They're giving you a pro forma, so that, if you've got any stations that you have to develop competence, that they give you a bit of a template to do that. And discussing that with your education supervisor then is what we want you to do. So you'll get the report. It's a very detailed report. It's quite frankly slightly too detailed, I think, but it's incredibly detailed, and you want to really find some time to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and really assess what and understand what the assessors thought about you, about your performance at each station. And underline the areas where you were praised or you were told you did really well, and the areas where you want to improve your performance or work on developing certain aspects of your performance. So the idea is that you and your education supervisor will develop an action plan, a PDP, in response to the feedback. Like I said, it's not pass or fail, but we will need to see that you've got evidence of appropriate remediation, closing the gaps where necessary in any other stations. So this is an old slide, and I don't know if it's still, I think, above expectations, meeting expectations, further development required is what I still see in the START report. touch wood, we haven't had significant concerns in the last couple of years, but we have had in the previous years. So although it's not a pass or fail scenario, if there's something about the trainee's performance, albeit hypothetical, that means that the assessors are worried about what the trainee might do on the clinical floor and there's significant concerns, then that is flagged up immediately. And that's something that's fed back to the head of school, and the trainee is supported through that, through a kind of more formal process. Okay, so I've stopped calling this remediation and I've started calling it reflection, and I kind of use, okay, reflection and remediation is what we kind of put on our ARCP requirements or checklist. For your ARCP, we want to see evidence that you have gone through your START assessment, whether you had areas of development or not. Because, like I said, it can and should be used as a positive tool to help you. And so we want you to have done that, to have discussed with the educational supervisor and to have actually shown evidence to the ARCP panel that you've looked through your START assessment report and you have reflected on the report, and where there are gaps that need to be closed, developmental areas, we want you to have developed a PDP and shown evidence that you have met those development needs. Without this, although it's not a pass or fail, an outcome 6 cannot be issued. And we have had occasional, we have instances in the last 3 or 4 years where we have actually, the ARCP panel has not looked at for the START reflection remediation, and the trainees have had, you know, stations where they needed to show development, and it's gone through to the college stroke GMC, and they've come back to us to say, can you look at this again? So they will look at it, even though it's not a pass or fail. So without it now, we will not issue an outcome 6, which is your final outcome that you need to be able to apply for your CCT. So this is what we, that you can do it in any way you like, as long as you show evidence that you have reflected and remediated on your START assessment. And trainees do it differently. So I've picked 1 or 2 from ARCPs that we've done over the years, some that I like, and I quite like this one. This trainee has picked up on areas where they need to plug gaps or, you know, developmental areas, and they've talked about how they address this, the evidence, and then they put the date they achieved the evidence in question. But this one is the one I prefer. So this is a reflection rather than just a remediation. So you could call it reflection stroke remediation. And this trainee has gone through each station and thought and made notes about how they felt the assessment went, and then whether the assessors brought up any developmental needs and what action plans that they have drawn up and then they'll talk about where that can be found. So I think this is better because you reflect as well as remediate. But however you do it, just make sure that you do it in a way that is obvious to anyone looking through your e-portfolio what you have done. So it is a developmental assessment that's formulated to aid your progression to senior clinical practice. Do engage with the process, and of course you are, because you're attending this this session in the evening when you could be doing something else. So you obviously are quite engaged. Make it work for you. You'll get out of it what you actually put into it. Don't make it a tick box exercise. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say. I didn't talk about putting this. Did I talk about putting this into your ARCP folder? So when you've done your START reflection stroke remediation, please create a subfolder, and that subfolder should go into your relevant ARCP folder. So if you did this during your ST7 year, which hopefully you did, your penultimate ARCP, then it should be in that folder. for whatever, whether it's some winter ARCP or summer ARCP, because the ARCP panel will look for it, and it will be very hard if they have to go through your e-portfolio to try and find out where the information is. So signpost it, because it's a very important aspect of your level 3 evidence. And I think that's all I have to say. So I shall stop sharing now.
Great.
Stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you.
Okay.
There's one question, well, there were two questions in the chat so far. There was one, will START be in person or online? And Sue, do correct if I'm wrong, but it's from the website, it looks like it will be online for the foreseeable. And then there's one, what is just enough for critical appraisal skill needed for this assessment? Any resources? I've put some links, and there's another course by the education subgroup of the London School of Paediatrics on critical appraisal, so I will find the link for that and share it. But in the meantime, Sue, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Just to say with the critical appraisal, I mean, yeah, it's for the START assessment, but these are skills that we should all be using with journal clubs, and when you become a consultant, you'd have to have some, you know, some critical appraisal skills. So again, it's you know, don't do it just because of the START assessment. Do it because actually you want to develop those skills, because they'll come in useful in your clinical practice.
Thanks very much, Anne. I'm going to back up everything that Anne has said. I've been a START assessor since START was invented, and I'm actually very proud of it, because I think in paediatrics, we don't give you an exam at the end, whereas many other specialties do. And the preparation you do for START is really the same preparation as you need to do for consultant interviews. So if you've covered everything in START, you've covered everything you're going to need for consultant interviews. It is online. I personally hate it online. I would love to go back in person, but it is as it is. And I have to say, I'm slightly running out of steam with doing it as an assessor, because it's a day when we're panicking about, will the virtual platform work? Will Wi-Fi be okay? And be reassured that as long as you've given your phone number to the START assessment, and you'll have been asked for that, we all have a list of all your phone numbers. So if we suddenly get cut off mid-assessment, we will just hang on, just wait, and we will phone you. And we'll continue the assessment on the phone. And if for any reason you don't manage to sort of get into the virtual room, and you don't meet up with your assessor, or the information that you're supposed to read beforehand doesn't appear before you, do not worry. We will just forget that station and we'll tag it on to the end. So we're endlessly adjusting to make sure that everybody gets a fair exposure and fair time. I would say that all the scenarios, they're all real life scenarios, and they're all, we get together, we meet as a group and we talk about scenarios. What should we do this time around? And there's a massive bank of them. So sometimes the scenarios will reappear, but new scenarios are always being written. And a lot of them are just quite straightforward, common sense things. So for example, handover. You get given a handover sheet, and you are the registrar that day, and you're told you've got an SHO, you've got a medical student, and your consultant's on the way in or late or something, and then you're given an update of what's going on, and then you need to decide what you're going to do. Who you're going to see first. You might send the medical student round to try and get an urgent scan on somebody, but it's just having a logical approach to how you're going to make that morning run and talking it through. And just try to be yourself. Try to do what you would normally do as a registrar, because you are ST7 and you know all this stuff. There's no kind of trick question. There's no trying to get you to say the wrong thing. Do use common sense, though. So if there's a question that seems like, the rule in the hospital is to do this, but common sense tells you should do it this way, then do default to common sense. I cannot stress that enough. Sometimes people feel they should always answer a question because that's what the rules say, but actually sometimes you land up sort of getting into a muddle about it. The critical appraisal you get given quite a long time ahead. I think it's about a week ahead. So you can really have a good old look and go through the paper and really kind of understand it. And bear in mind that the person who's going through it with you might be somebody like me, and I'm really rubbish critical appraisal. So really anything you say to me will be impressive. And the other thing I wanted to say to you is that the feedback you get, the way it's arranged is that the START board, the people who invent the questions, will write down what we're expecting you as trainees to give us, what sort of to cover in your answers. So there's a kind of pre-written, this is what we were hoping you would discuss. And then then we put in, this is what you did really well. So that's the kind of free text stuff that we do next. This is what you did really well, blah, 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 blah. And we give you an outcome. And if your outcome is one where there's a sort of developmental need, we've also got a pre-programmed bit we can put in. You may like to do X, Y, or Z. You might like to attend a management meeting, this suggestion, or do this course or something. I have heard that some of the recent START assessments, some of my trainees have come back and said, well, I've looked at my friend who got developmental needs and I got exceeds expectations, and we've both been given, you might like to do the following 4 things. And I think that's the assessor's fault. I think the assessor should just have not copied and pasted that bit you might like to do. So it's important that when you're discussing, when you sit down with your supervisor, when you've got your results, you sit down, and if it doesn't make sense, if you've been told this is X, you've done all this brilliantly and well done, you've done blah, 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 and there's a bit at the end that says you might like to now go on this course, just reflect quickly. Maybe it's just the assessor who's just put the whole thing there rather than the bit that he needed to put. And Meret's nodding, so you may have had that experience when you did yours. So that's really all I want to say. We all get given random stations. We just get given, you're doing that. So we don't pick what we do. So just be yourself. Remember, we're not trying to catch you out. And I would say generally there are no real surprises with people. You know, if somebody's doing well as an ST7, they'll do well at START. If somebody's really struggling a bit, then it will usually come out a bit at START, but don't worry about that because it's an opportunity to reflect and maybe just look at some areas where you're struggling slightly. I'll stop there, but I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you. There's a question specifically for Anne before I go to Meret and Vicky, or maybe Sue, asking about, so if you do your START in ST7 and then you put all your reflection and remediation in your ST7 ARCP, what do you do in ST8?
Relax.
Fab.
Absolutely relax. Because as long as it's been mentioned in the ARCP for your ST7 into your ST8 year, then that's fine. I think what I might do if I was that trainee, I might bring that folder back into my last ARCP folder, just so that it's there, in case the panel just want to check that the panel the year before got it right, and that everything is there. But once you've done so, then you don't need to, and you might want to update evidence though, because it's an ongoing thing. So you might want to actually just go through, add something else, refresh, use it for you. So it's okay once you've done it once, as long as you've done it okay.
Lovely. Okay, there's a few other questions coming in, but I'll get Meret and Vicky to speak to you, and then I'll share the rest of the questions. Okay, Meret.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share my slides. Can you see this window, the START window?
We can't see any. Oh, coming. Got it.
Thing. Okay. Hi everyone. So I'm Meret. I'm one of the previous START trainees who sat START, and I thought when I was kind of going up into it, I didn't really know what to expect, and sometimes just having that cloud of ambiguity or not really knowing what you might face is a little bit anxiety provoking. So hopefully in just like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I can tell you a little bit more about the sorts of things that you expect in the stations, and then we can answer any specific questions with Vicky, who's also sat it recently. So the sorts of topics that are covered, as Anne and Sue were saying, tend to be less focus on clinical, but more on kind of managerial logistics and the sorts of leadership roles that you will take on as a consultant. So safeguarding will always be in there. There'll always be something about ethics or consent or law. There's usually a logistics one about like quality improvement or building a business case or service improvement. And there's always a handover one, or at least there has been so far, where you get given a list of patients and just as in a handover, there's a whole list of patients. You quickly skim through them and then you discuss with the assessor who would you prioritize first to be seen, and what sort of things are you anticipating with each of those patients. They'll tell you you have like a junior doctor, sorry, like a middle grade doctor, you have one FY1, and you have a senior nurse with you. And then you can talk a little bit about how you might allocate roles on that day, and who you might ask to see which patients. So very kind of relevant to real life. And there'll always be a safe prescribing station, and we'll kind of talk about that in a little bit more now in coming up, because it's slightly different from the other stations. And so far there's always been a critical appraisal station also, where you talk about a paper that, as Sue said, you get given about 5 or 7 days beforehand, and then always remember to kind of relate it back to the clinical question that they put in front of you on the actual day. And there's like the CASP checklist that you can use, and that helped me go through the paper beforehand and be able to kind of pick out things that you felt were particularly good about the paper, the strong evidence that was there, but then also look at the limitations and to what extent then it can be applied to your population. So far there's always been a teaching station, and that's, I'd say, probably one of the more fun stations, where you have 8 minutes to teach some medical students about a small topic, and it's not really looking at your knowledge as much as it is your teaching technique, and it tends to be very, very basic things that you get asked to teach on. It'll be, for example, like the signs of bronchiolitis, or talk about the signs of respiratory. Yeah, I can hear you, but I don't know. I don't know what happened there. Yeah, so they'll be looking to see if you can summarize, if you can check understanding of the medical students, and you can engage them in a fun way. And then in most of them, there is something about risk management, like answering a complaint, investigating an SI, DATEX, duty of candor, that sort of thing. So as Anne was saying, we generally tend to take it in ST7. I know that there was a question about what if you are going into ST8. it's still okay as long as you have some time, 6 months or so, to put into action the reflections that you have from the feedback that you're given. And this year there's the March sitting or March diet, and then there's another one in October. And then, as Sue was saying, sometimes there's some like ad hoc ones that then get placed for people who are coming towards the end of their training. In terms of whether you're sitting as a as a grid trainee or as a general paediatrician trainee, the stations are slightly different. So generally there tends to be 10 stations and 2 rest stations, or at least that's what it has been historically, but you'll get told more about that in the briefing that you get given by the RCPCH about a week before the actual assessment. And for the SPIN trainees and for the general paediatric trainees, it tends to be 10 general stations. There's always kind of 3 clinical stations, and then all the rest are related to the management topics I was talking to you about earlier. And if you're a grid trainee, then it will be 7 general stations and then 3 stations in your subspecialty. And most of the time, the subspecialty stations tend to be assessed by people who are from your subspecialty. So there's 6 domains that are covered in each station. They look to see about your decision making, your knowledge, your management of complexity, your professional approach, your safety and risk management, and your communication. And often they will combine 2 things in a station. So for example, they might give you a clinical scenario where, as happened in my prescribing station, where there was a drug error and it occurred to a patient, and then they ask you what happens after that. So then you start to talk about, for example, if it was a trainee who made a prescribing error, you talk about clinically how you would make sure that the patient is safe, and then you would go on to talk about, for example, looking as to how that you help that trainee to learn from the error that they made. You look at governance systems and how there could be, for example, a quality improvement project that comes from this in order to help improve safe prescribing in your department, something like that. So always be mindful that often there'll be kind of 2 aspects or 3 aspects to a question. You generally tend to get marked, as Anne was saying, well above expected standard or further development. And then there's a global, and that's for each of these 6 domains. And then there's a global rating at the end of each scenario that tells you essentially, do they feel that you're working at the level of a first day consultant, which would be the expected standard, or above that, or needing to work on some more. And even if you're needing further development, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just saying that you're at the level of a trainee, and just that you need to kind of maybe put some more work into this area so that you can build yourself up to the level of a consultant. So we just said there's 12 stations, 2 rest stations, and then the 10 actual stations. And that generally you get given 4 minutes preparation time before the stations, and then 8 minutes of conversation time with the examiner. And for quite a lot of the stations, it really did feel like a chat. You're talking to the examiner, and there might be a little bit of to and fro between you. Other stations don't lend themselves as much to that. I definitely found my critical appraisal station a bit of a monologue, and I just kept going and stopping every now and again to check if there was any questions. But all he wanted me to do is just to keep talking through the paper and all the relevant pertinent points that I'd kind of picked out from it in my appraisal. So some of them feel like a monologue, other are more like a chat with a colleague, and you just kind of have to see how it goes on the day with that particular assessor. So the general stations tend to be the 8 minutes of monologue, or the 8 minutes of talking, and the 4 minutes prep time. There's just a few little kind of quirks to some of them. So the teaching station, you don't actually direct your conversation to the examiner, you direct it to the 2 medical students. And in the online format, the medical students will come up as 2 kind of boxes on your screen, 2 or 3, and you kind of direct all your conversation with them. You will also see a box for the examiner, and they're just kind of there listening into the whole scenario. And then in the prescribing station, that's a little bit longer. So you get about 16 minutes preparation time, and then 4 minutes of reading before you go into the station. And you don't need a BNF or BNFC, as perhaps previously that was what was given. Now you get given the monograph for the relevant drug that you are looking into, and you have your phone as a calculator if you need it. And the critical appraisal station, as I said before, that you get given the information 5 to 7 days beforehand. So just a few nuances about the online platform. Don't worry about it being online. I think they've gone through so many iterations of it now, that I hope the software now is much better. It was fine with my one, but I know that some people had some technical difficulties in theirs. And as Sue said, don't worry if for whatever reason it cuts out, or the connection's all bad. They will call you, so have your phone with you on the day, and they will call you at the end to kind of go over that station that got interrupted. So when you, on the actual day, so sorry, two weeks beforehand or a week and a half beforehand, they will kind of have a webinar that they will kind of go through each of the stations with you and pretty much repeat what I've just said now. And then on the actual day, you'll click in and you'll be put in a waiting room, which is an online waiting room. And then when the time starts for the actual assessment, you just click on one button and then you'll be carried through each of the stations. So there is a timer, and I think you get like a 2-minute warning before the end of each station. And once the time's up, that's it, it's up, and you just it doesn't matter if you're kind of mid-sentence, you'll just get carried into the next room, which will be the reading, like preparation room for the next scenario, unless it's a rest station, of course. Just probably one of my big top tips is just make sure that your software is compatible with the webinar platform that they choose to use. Already Anne's talked a lot about the feedback, and I found it very useful actually, having that quite personalized attention at my performance, and that it was an opportunity, as Anne was saying, to really try and use it to hone in your kind of all the areas that you really want to focus on in the last few months or year of your training. So even if you get a remediation, it's very normal, or areas to develop, it's very normal, and it's just as an opportunity to focus on that particular area. So just to finish off, I had 10 top tips that I thought might be useful. So number 1, check, as I said, your platform, your software works with the platform that the RCPCH will use. I think most of the time now they recommend Google Chrome, so just have that downloaded. In the preparation time that you have between now and your actual start date, meet up with some people who are also sitting it. Katie has sent links for the Start WhatsApp group that we have, that pretty much has people nationally, and you can just find people on there who want to create a small study group and use those opportunities then to practice questions together. There's the START Trello board, which has quite a few resources on it. It has some example questions, and it's a really good opportunity there to add your own questions for other people to answer. And the RCPCH website also has a lot of information about the actual START assessment. If you have any kind of extra adjustment needs, like needing subtitles or anything like that, then make sure that you do email the college beforehand, just to make sure that they're aware, especially if you need any extra time or things like that. And what I found quite useful in the run-up was to make little flashcards and just kind of write the sorts of things that you might want to talk about in those stations. So an SI station, what sorts of things do you need to say? Or a duty of candour station, what are the things that you need to cover in that? And that just helped me have it at the forefront of my head, so that on the actual day I could just say it as opposed to having to stop and think. And then on the actual day, make sure you just eat well. It's 3 hours long roughly, so do make sure that you eat something before you start, and probably take some snacks in with you. I had a bottle of water and just like a small biscuit bar, just to kind of keep you going. Have your phone with you, just in case there's connection problems, and have a notepad and pen, because you have those 4 minutes before you go into the station, and you can just jot down some ideas that you might want to talk about when you get in. Read the questions carefully, and as I said before, make sure that you think about what's the immediate situation, and then how can we think about this on a more macro level, and if I was the head of a department, how would I want to use this situation to improve? And then if you're anything like me and you get kind of imposter syndrome, then it helps to try and kind of really visualize yourself as the first day consultant going into it, so that you kind of get into the role, and it's a bit of a role play, but you feel like this is where I'm going to be in a year or so from now. I thought of, there's a lot of information on the Trello board, so don't feel too overwhelmed. It's just there for kind of dipping in and out of, but the 5 things that I thought were really useful now that I've gone through the whole process, I'd say was the kind of end of life or life limiting and life threatening treatment, the RCPCH guidelines for that. That's really useful. Looking at the GMC guidelines for kind of consent and Gillett competence, and so that's covered in the 0 to 18 years, and that's on the GMC website. The duty of candour and honesty when things go wrong is also a document on the GMC website that I found very useful, and how to respond to a complaint on the MDU website was also something I thought was good. And just knowing the process of a child death, an unexpected death, was something that I hadn't really ever read before, and so in the preparation for the assessment I did read up on that, and that I found that really good. Not just for the START assessment, I didn't actually get a START station on it, but it was something that I thought is really useful for real life. So make the whole process work for you. In the run up to the assessment, pull your consultants or pull other people who are in the know, the local pharmacist or whatever, and just ask them about certain situations that you think might arise in the START assessment, and chat to them through them. What would you do in this situation? Or I actually don't know much about, for example, because I'm an ED trainee, I didn't know much about breach reports, so I just asked a consultant, tell me about breach reports. And just it's an opportunity for you to ask maybe those questions that you've never thought to ask before. Try and enjoy the assessment. It is just formative at the end of the day, so make it work for you. Relax and enjoy the discussions, and see it as a kind of growth exercise rather than it being punitive. And don't forget the must reads, because I found those very useful. Okay. Sorry, I think I talked a bit too long, but if anyone has any questions, then pop them in the chat, or Vicky's also here to answer any questions for you guys.
Yeah, there's a few questions in the chat, but I'll get Vicky to have a chat.
Hi guys, can you hear me? Great. Hi, I'm Vicky, a paediatric consultant working at Whips Cross. I did my START assessment, I think it was October 2020, and I was asked to be involved in this evening because I actually did a teaching session for the registrars at the where I'm currently working on START, and they found it really useful. So that's how I got involved with this. So hopefully my top tips will also be helpful to you, because I got some really good feedback from the team. So I've got a few slides that I prepared at the weekend. I was on call, so I apologise for the fact that they were a bit hold on 1 second, let's try and find my screen. Why are you being weird? Well, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. And you can see START top tips?
Yep, not presenting to you, but
cool, hold on, it should come up in a minute. Let me just sort that out. Presenting, is that working?
not yet.
Oh, odd. Come on. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So as I said, I did my START in 2020, and actually a little story. We just moved house and we had no Wi-Fi. The house was full of dust, builders everywhere. So I was really stressed about it. And I ended up actually hiring a room at the local travel lodge, which was interesting, having to hire it for a day just for my START assessment. But it was actually quite nice to have a space that was quiet. I checked out the Wi-Fi before I did it, because it's quite important to make sure you've got good connection. So I recommend making sure you know where you're going to sit it and that your Wi-Fi works. Anyway, so my top tips for my START. So basically, I used this framework when I was answering most of the questions. And as good paediatricians, we should always have the child at the centre of everything we do. So actually, my sort of framework I used to answer all the questions was I'd always start with the child. And that was normally safety, but addressing any medical issues for the child or whatever. Then talking about the junior that was involved in the said scenario. So I would talk about how I would, use the opportunity to perhaps teach or get reflection, or get feedback, give them feedback or support them in any way. Then I'd use the concept of the team around the child and the junior, and how I would make any changes based on the scenario. So I talk about that, and then also talking about the department. And I think one of the things that we don't always appreciate as registrars and trainees is actually that as paediatricians and as consultants, we aren't just responsible for the child in front of us. We are also responsible for the junior doctors that are looking after the children, who are looking up to us as their pastoral supporters, but also the team that are looking after the child, and also the wider department. So I think it's quite a nice framework. If you can think, have I mentioned everyone in this diagram, the child, the junior, the team, the department? And if you can manage that for every question, I think you'll be doing really well. So just a few tips are based on some of the stations that I did. So as Meret said, there's normally a safe prescribing one. And I think it's just important to sort of imagine yourself filling out the drug chart. So it is a bit now, it's a slightly odd situation because you aren't given a physical drug chart, but they will send you, or they'll give you a picture of one. And what I would advocate, and I did quite well on this, and I did well because I talked about things that I guess maybe not everyone talked about, stuff like looking at, had the allergy box been filled in? Was it signed? Was it dated? And actually just working really systematically through the drug chart, and imagine you're filling it out yourself and just checking that everything's been done correctly. So you'd be surprised I think for the one I had, I think they hadn't put the route. And if you hadn't gone through that drug chart systematically, you may not have picked that up. So it's just really important to look through the whole drug chart systematically, as if you were actually filling it in yourself, and then make any points that you pick up as you go along. If there's any drugs that you know normally have a level, talk about it and say, I would normally do a level. If you can't think of when the level's done, just say, I'd look at a guideline. That's fine. You don't need to remember everything in detail. Then when you do pick up any errors, if you do pick up any errors on the drug chart, once again, this is about, you know, are you now looking at the holistic picture? Are you not just thinking about service provision? How can you make sure that this department is safe and your juniors are safe? So if you pick up any errors, talk about how you would do the duty of candour, speak to the family, but also feed back to the trainee who may have done the drug chart in a really supportive way, and, you know, and have a look into that and explore why the error may have happened, and talk about how you can do higher levels of sort of management roles when it comes to something as simple as a drug chart. So, you know, how would your department benefit from this? You know, you may well say, you know, I would be interested in clinical governance and becoming the, you know, lead consultant for medicine safety, whatever, you know, and they sort of like the fact that you're thinking about the bigger picture, not just about the simple error they may have been picked up. Then hopefully this is going to move. It's stuck. Hold on. Then another one, handover. So I actually got into a bit of a rabbit hole when I came to the handover station. I was a bit of a geek about it. And I think we often think that handover is there just as a service provision tool, but actually it's much richer than that. And there's so much more you can get from it. So after this one, I would say, imagine being the consultant you wish you had. So I think we often find handovers can be a bit scary when you're the night team, because you're going to be questioned about lots of things and you're worried you may have done things incorrectly, or you just sort of see it as, I don't know, a part of the day that everybody has to do. But actually it's really important to remember that it's a really rich source of information, knowledge, and a really good opportunity to teach both the doctors in the team, but also the wider health professionals, the nurses. So actually use that opportunity to think about that and talk about that in your handover station. And they really like that. So I talked about that in my station, and I got extra, you know, bonus, you know, they mentioned the fact that I sort of saw it as a holistic way, and they liked that. So I think it's important to go, okay, handovers for a couple of reasons. One, obviously patient safety first and foremost, and we all do that with our safety huddles that most people now do at the beginning of their handover. So talk through that. Then talk about how it's important to share information, the night team handing over to the day team. But I think it's really important to remember that handover is a really good way to teach. You can do a 5-minute teaching. You can talk about how, you know, ideally, if you have time and, you know, there was no clinical acuity on the ward, you may take an opportunity to teach the juniors and teach the nurses all together. And what that sort of stuff really does stand out. And also, obviously, handover is about patient flow. So talking about how you're going to see your patients, what order of priority. So normally people like the idea of who's the sickest first, who's going to be going home, and then everyone else that's going to be there for a while you can probably see later. And as Sue and Meret talked about before, talking about how you're going to use your workforce in a efficient way, but also in a way to perhaps enhance education, so everyone gets something out of handover on the actual ward round, so it's not just for service provision. Ethics. So the sort of top tips I got for this, I thought about this, was basically, remember, as a consultant, even as a consultant of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but particularly as a, you know, consultant of one day, you can absolutely phone a friend. Ethics is tricky, and they're not expecting you to have the answers all at the tip of your fingers and know the right or wrong thing, and they just want to make sure you are safe and pragmatic. So if they give you a scenario that you're like, whoa, I have no idea where to start with this, make sure the child is safe. That may be admission or whatever. If it's, you know, an end of life decision and you have no concept of how to manage that, you know, do what you need to do to keep the child alive, and then you can phone a friend. And there's lots of different people you can call to get advice from, and you can have this conversation with the person that's doing the station with you. Talk about using your local safeguarding team, social services, the hospital legal team, and then also consider other professionals that are going to be seeing this child who may know this child better than you. So other hospitals, perhaps a PICU that the child's been to before, and actually don't feel that you need to answer this question all on your own, because you don't. And even as a consultant of a year and a consultant of 5 or 10 years, very few times ethical questions answered just by one person. Then I think the other thing that's quite helpful is to think about ahead. So they may give you a situation where it's a Friday night, which is, you know, I feel like that's quite a common one to sort of, you know, make you think about how you would manage it. and think about what you would say, how you manage the child now, how you're going to manage your child in the immediate future, but also the long-term plans for complicated children. You know, are you going to need a discharge planning meeting? Are you going to try and explore the ceiling of care of the parents and getting that written down in a formal way, which would make it easier for your juniors and your team members when they're having to make decisions at the middle of the night or when you're not around? So just sort of think about that. But I think the most important thing about the ethics one is realise you're not on your own making these decisions, and they don't expect you to have all the answers. The conflict one, I use this framework of SPIES, which I think they talk about at the consultant interviews. And it's one about, you know, how you'd manage a trainee in difficulty or a colleague in difficulty or some conflict. And the acronym stands for Seek Information, Patient Safety, Initiative, Escalate and Support. So it may just be, I don't know, there's an SHO who someone is seen, I don't know, taking cocaine or whatever. How do you manage that? And, you know, obviously you're going to seek information, get a bit more, you know, knowledge about what's happened, checking that, you know, whatever work this doctor has done, do you need to check that the patients are okay? Can they work? If they're working now, do they need to come off the shift? All that sort of stuff. Then actually, you know, just trying to get a bit more nitty gritty about what's actually the concern and what's going on. And, you know, do you need to take them off the rota and then get someone else to cover for them, that sort of stuff. Then thinking about, do you need to speak to their line manager? For a trainee, it's going to be their educational supervisor, making sure you document all your conversations, all that sort of stuff. And then it's really important to remember that, you know, most of us come to work wanting to do a good job. So therefore, when things are going wrong, we need to think about supporting our colleagues, and they want to make sure that you know that and that it's important that we look after each other. So having an idea of where you would signpost people to go for support and help. So I quite like that framework for SPIES, and it was quite a good one that's helpful. Then for the safeguarding, once again, back to that sort of diagram I gave you at the beginning, starting with a child. Once again, this is very much like ethics. And even today as a consultant, safeguarding decisions are very, very rarely made on your own. You speak to different people about it, and then you get a collective idea of what this child's life is like and what it's like outside of the hospital. But start with a child, or if you start with a child, you can't go wrong for any of these stations. So make sure they're safe, treat any medical issues needed, and be really obvious about it. So for safeguarding, I think, is like a driving test. You have to go over the top and show them that you know exactly what you're doing. If it's clear that this is a safeguarding concern and a red flag, say it at the beginning. Oh, this is a real like safeguarding concern. I'm not happy for this child to go home. You don't need to be smart and clever about it. Just say it as it is. Talk about the family, be open-minded, and talk about how you're going to have a really non-judgmental conversation with the parents and document everything as they say it. Inform them of the plan, and also think about other kids that may not be there with you but at home, and it's important they hear you think about that. Then once again, it's about the junior. If you've got a situation where the junior is not acted appropriately, make sure you've said that, and you're going to actually then try and fix any errors that may have happened. So you may be calling the child back or whatever, or doing investigations that the junior's not done. But also it's important to remember, as consultants, we are now pastoral, and we're here to support and learn and make people better paediatricians. So actually supporting the junior, thinking about doing work-based assessments with them, making sure, you know, depending on the severity of the case, is this trainee okay? You know, it's not nice having to deal with safeguarding issues with children. So it's important to check on that. And they like the fact that you're thinking about the bigger picture, not just about the safeguarding. And then just have an understanding of your pathway. So, you know, understanding that if a under 1-year-old comes in with a fracture, there's certain things you need to do, and just saying that in a really explicit way they want you to say that. Then once again, it's about the department. You know, if an error happens, is the department safeguarding competent? If they're not, talk about ways how you would improve them and what you would do to make your department safe, such as guidelines or whatever. Finally, you're already incredible paediatricians. You wouldn't have got this far otherwise. Take it as an opportunity to reinforce the learning and consolidate any gaps that you've had, and just try and enjoy the experience like everyone else has said, and just, you know, show them all the wonderful stuff you already know and all the amazing, you know, from all the lovely training you've had. And finally, you are the champions for the child before you, and just advocate that and show your passion for your speciality, and that will take you really far. Thanks.
Lovely. I think if we get Jane to just chat briefly about QI, and then there's a few questions, and I'm sure there'll be some more as we go along.
Thanks, Katie. So hi everybody, I'm Jane Runnacles. I'm one of the TPDs for education and lead for the QI Change Champions programme. And I am just going to do a shameless plug that we are open for applicants for our next round. So we run it in spring and in the autumn. So if you guys would like a really high quality QI project, which I can guarantee you will talk about consultant interview, do sign up, because nearly all of our trainees this time have got in posters at International Forum. So we really support you to get a really high quality bit of work out of the project. So do sign up. We have a limited number of places, but this is hot off the press. So if you sign up today, you should get a place. And also just to say that we are trying, through the School of Paediatrics, we are trying to launch some of the old LME evenings. You're probably all too young to remember, but we used to have face-to-face evenings for level 3 trainees stepping up into sort of thinking about their consultant roles. And then we're very keen that this leadership development is for all levels of training. But we thought for the spring and into July, we'll do a little series specifically for those thinking about the consultant role. And I may come back to you, Vicky, actually, but it'd be really nice to have some new consultants sharing experiences, a bit of kind of what I wish I knew, a bit about job planning and things like that. So watch this space in the School of Paediatrics. We will be putting some sessions together face to face, which would be really nice at the RSM. So there's a bit of networking over a glass of wine maybe, and maybe dinner afterwards. So we're going to do that with the RCPCH stepping up. Thanks, Katie, for putting the link in. That's amazing. Very efficient there. So that's for the QI Change Champions. It's open to any level of training, and actually we've got free places for parents. So we're really trying to encourage some co-production, some work as well, and other members of the multidisciplinary team. I don't have a huge amount to say because I think a lot has been covered so far, some really great advice, and I don't want to overload you massively. I think there's a few key themes that have come up already. So in QI, the most important parts, everybody's heard of PDSA cycles from the Model for Improvement. And if you haven't, then I have recorded a QI session before for the start. So please watch that. It's on YouTube. So if you want a crash course in QI, you can watch that. I'm not going to cover all that again. But before you get to the PDSA cycles, where you test out change ideas and try and make changes in the department and measure and check whether what you're doing is actually an improvement, there's a huge part before that, which is really trying to understand your problem and trying to unpick it from many different aspects before you kind of work out what your aim is for your improvement work that you're going to do. And that step is really important, and it's actually the step that people do really badly. So on our Change Champions program, we spend the majority of the program really getting you to explore the problem. And the reason why I'm talking about this here in the start evening is the same goes for the scenarios you're given in the start questions. So a lot of these scenarios, you need to start by really exploring and understanding. And Vicky referred to that in most of her examples, actually. And, it's so important to vocalize that that's what you'll do, and you engage the right people and collaborate, or, consult the right people. So whether this is a complaint or a safeguarding case or an ethics question, or, whatever it is, particularly in governance, when you think about the M&Ms you've been to, or the complaints you've maybe hopefully have had a chance to discuss, to try and understand the complaints process, the very first step is really trying to understand it. And I know it sounds obvious, but it's the bit that people don't always spend enough time and attention on. And that's where the principles of QI kind of filter through to all of the kind of questions you get, not only in START, but a consultant interview. So it's really important to talk about how you're going to try and understand the problem. And Vicky gave a really nice example of how you can make sure you've covered all the bases with thinking about the patient, but also the wider team, the trainee, but also the wider multidisciplinary team, because more than ever as a consultant, you are you're looking out and working with a much wider group of people than you're probably familiar with actually when you're a more junior trainee. And obviously not only the patient, their family. So really trying to understand and explore what's going on. And then, you know, if this is a scenario around service improvement, that's when you can start thinking about your key stakeholders you're going to work together with to create some sort of aim that's smart and achievable before you move on to actually testing out some possible solutions. And as doctors, we're really solution focused. So we often just jump to making changes in the department, which don't necessarily result in sustained change. So, you know, I'm not going to say too much about the model for improvement or QI unless you'd like me to talk more about it. So just shout if you would. But really go back to, you know, keep it simple about, don't assume that that they know what you're talking about. Be really clear. Stakeholders, I know is a bit of jargon, but be clear what you mean about who you're going to engage, who you're going to collaborate with, who you talk to. And as Vicky said, as consultants, we often ourselves call for help and collaborate with other people. So just be clear, like who it is that you might go to, who you might discuss it with, who you might escalate things to, who you might see even outside of your department. Things like support services are you know, often trust-wide. There's lots of support and resources outside of your own department. So you have to think a bit more widely about these things. Just another point is about structuring your question. So it goes the same for interviews. You know, try and summarize what you're going to say, then say it in a bit more detail, and then summarize what you've said. You know, just really, because these, you know, I know what it's like in interviews when I actually when I'm on the panel for interviews or when I'm doing assessments. It's really hard as an examiner to always stay completely focused and listen to everything. And it sounds awful because of course we want to hear you, but human nature is like that. And actually really, you know, don't be afraid of hammering home your points that you want to make, and be clear what your main points are that you're going to make. So be really clear, you know, I suppose my 3 main messages are, and you can always, you know, it's a technique you can use in an interview as well. And it is a conversation. It's not, you know, it's not meant to be, you know, it's not as formal as an interview. You can have more of a discussion. And these are they're all scenarios that are really useful as a consultant. So I know it seems at times that it's a bit of a tick box, but actually it is to help prepare you. So, you know, really make the most of the opportunity and make the most of speaking to your team and your consultants where you work beforehand, because we all be completely happy to talk through certain scenarios or give our perspectives on things, or, you know, if you want to understand how a complaint is managed, just go and see clinical lead and ask to go through one and see what the response letter was and things like that. I think I'll stop waffling on unless there's anything else. I can't remember what I normally do these things because I forget what I've already said in the past. Anything else, Katie, I've missed? I normally talk about.
Vicky, could I get you to stop sharing? And then I will go through. There's only a couple of questions, but I'm sure there will be more. Ah, yes. So yes, Meret, the one that you've just started answering. So there was a question about how interactive you can be for the teaching station. How much do you get? Someone's asked about using Menti or a mini whiteboard, which might be more challenging. What do you two think?
I think you've only really got 8 minutes. You've got to kind of give them a mini introduction, give them the actual content, and then summarize. And in the introduction, also find out a little bit about their level of training and what they wanted to get out of the session. So you don't really have too much time. So I wouldn't kind of mess around too much with like other technology. I actually don't know if the online platform will let you kind of log out to to get onto other technology. So just keep it very simple. You can have like a diagram or something that you hold up, make it old school. Don't worry too much about making it look fancy. It's just about your techniques in teaching.
Yeah, I would go on. Okay, I would mirror that. So in the sense of, I think, you know, a good teaching session is actually getting the trainees to be really engaged in it and get them to do more of the talking. So, and, you know, leave it quite open. One, check what they already know, check what they were hoping to get out of it. It's a really short teaching session. So explain to them you can't cover how to take a paediatric history in 5 minutes. That's not possible. So therefore, you mainly just pick a little part of the paediatric history and just go into details of that, but actually use the students and make them do the work. And that is actually a very good teaching session. So you don't need to worry about knowing everything and you doing all the talking. The less talking you do, the better, I'd say.
The other questions are about the different timing for the preparation. So yes, 4 minutes for the teaching. For the prescribing, you get a whole station beforehand. So you have, so it would be 16 minutes. And then for the preparation for the critical appraisal, you get it 5 working days beforehand. There's a question about, for a neonatal grid trainee, is the handover neonatal or is it paediatric? And I suppose, Meret, if you're a PEM trainee, you never use a handover list. So what is it?
Yeah, so you still get a handover station even if you are a paediatric EM trainee. So I'm not sure if it would necessarily be just neonatal for the neonatal grid in terms of handover, because you are also a neonatal grid trainee, but you are as in you have a dual speciality in general paediatrics by the time you CCT. So I think it will just be the generic handover list that everyone else gets.
Yeah, it's a generic station. Handover is a generic station.
Lovely. There's a question about, there was a question on the beginning when people booked saying about how much time you need to prepare for START.